Welcome, y'all. Thanks for being patient. We're trying to get our video and mics and all of that set. My name is Kenny Easley, for those of you that I don't know. I'm the coordinator of student enrichment. How many of you are here for survey or internship and career foundations? What are the rest of you doing here? Just want to be here? Awesome. Okay, I love that. Well, we have Dr. Jeff Cornwall. For those of you who don't know Dr. Cornwall, he teaches entrepreneurship. What other classes do you teach?
Lots of
Entrepreneurship. So some of you might be double majoring, or you might decide to do a double major, or take entrepreneurship classes for your electives. We strongly encourage that as music business, EIS, songwriting, AET majors. And then Woody Bomar. Woody has been on our Curb College board for how long, Woody?
Forever.
Forever. Since Curb College
Since it started,
really?
much.
And we, if you didn't know, Curb College, we are in our 10 years. This academic year is our 10-year anniversary of existing as a college. So we're excited about that. We're going to do a lot of celebration at Best of the Best, which is March 29th, I think. So Woody began his career at Combined Music, writing for some amazing country artists, one being Loretta Lynn. He later became general manager, but left Combined to start Little Big Town Music. And he did that for 10 years. They had 15 #1 hits, which is crazy. He sold Little Big Town to Sony ATV, where he transitioned there as senior VP and GM of creative services. He's signed writer deals with, everyone from Taylor Swift to Blake Shelton, Josh Turner, Eric Church, Randall Lambert, Rascal Flatts, tons of folks. And then in 2007, he returned to independent publishing, and he opened Green Hills Music Group. And Green Hills has cuts by artists like George Strait and Rascal Flatts and Jake Owen and Luke Bryan and Hunter Hayes and a ton of other folks. So would you give him a warm Belmont welcome?
So what do you moved to Nashville, you told me 40 some odd years ago, and thought you were coming here to go into the music industry, but didn't. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I got a little sidetracked. I went to MTSU. I can say that here, can I?
Yep.
Okay. I went to MTSU. Then immediately after that, I was drafted into the Army and spent a year in the States, a year in Vietnam. And when I got out of Vietnam, I got out of the Army at the same time. So I'm from a small Middle Tennessee town, so I'm a Middle Tennessean by birth, about 60 miles from here. But I came to Nashville wanting to be a songwriter and be in the music business, but I just didn't connect well. I got an opportunity to take a job as a copywriter at an advertising agency. And
So let me just follow up on that. So what do you mean you didn't connect well? What is that?
it means I didn't meet people that I felt could do me any good, I guess. I just didn't feel good about the people that I was getting to know, and it doesn't mean I wouldn't have continued to move forward, but this other opportunity kind of came along, and I thought, well, yes, get a job in the daytime job, write songs at night. A lot of people do that, and it works, and they build their way through their career. So I was kind of that attitude. I probably really needed a job other than music, because my goal was really to be a songwriter, and ultimately I was interested in publishing, although I didn't really know what it was at that time. But I was just interested in songs and writing and dealing with songs. And so I got this job at an advertising agency. It was a copywriting job. I figured, well, it's writing, it's creative, so that will make sense. Let me say, to interject here, I have a cold today. I hope my voice is understandable, and please don't try to shake my hand afterward. I appreciate the thought, but for your own protection, just want to warn you about that. But anyway, so I did take this job, and then I did pretty well at it, and it was Nashville's oldest advertising agency. It wasn't a huge agency, but it was kind of cool. And then I got into some sort of art directing, and then sort of production management, and eventually into sales, became executive vice president of the company. I was there 10 years, and after about 8 years, I just decided this is not really what I came here to do. Because when you're in a real career, it takes all your creative energy, because I was taking work home at night. I wasn't writing songs at night, and I just kept dreaming of being a songwriter, and finally, after 10 years, I just walked away from it because I just reached a point where I thought I'm not going to retire at 65, which I didn't, and wonder if I could have made it in the music business. And I just gotta try.
So how did you make that decision? And that's a, did you have a family at that point?
Let me see, I guess, yes, I had one small child, and I have a wife who's been my wife for almost 43 years now. And my son works in a publishing company in LA, by the way. He grew up, wound up being in the music business. But how did I make that decision? It's really hard to say, but it just reached an emotional point where I couldn't stand not to anymore. I've heard someone else sort of describe it that way, and that's about the only way to describe it. And did I have a lot of great family support among my parents and friends and relatives to walk away from a pretty darn good paying job as an advertising executive to become an out-of-work songwriter? Didn't have a lot of support. So it takes
I can imagine the conversation with the in-laws might have been a little bit difficult. You want to quit what and do what?
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, I did do some freelance advertising work, and the agency actually hired me to do some projects, but I wasn't full-time and totally focused on sapping all my creative energy. So they were very cooperative in trying to help me pursue my dreams.
So the second time, how did you do it right? What did you do differently the second time, and how did you build the kind of connections you needed and kind of get integrated into the industry properly the second time?
I had friends who worked in radio because in the advertising world, the radio station salespeople, they're all about selling airtime. That's what they do. And so they were calling on me to buy airtime for my clients on their stations. And one particular guy who came to be a good friend had several friends that were in the music business. One that worked at a company called Cedarwood Publishing, which has been acquired long ago, but it was one of the early big publishers. He introduced me to some people there, and they published one of my songs, and it was a little novelty song. They did get it recorded. Then he introduced me to another guy, another publisher, who was very encouraging to me. And the more I met with this guy, he kept encouraging me, and I kept getting better and better as a writer because of the encouragement.
So why do you think he took that interest in you? I mean, that's always...
He saw something in me, and like I've seen in other people as my career has moved along, but he just saw some talent in me that he just felt compelled to help me out and encourage me. And he never got any of my songs recorded, but during that time, I met an old friend I had known years earlier who was then writing with another company, and I sort of moved my focus to that company, and it was called Combine Music. And so I wound up co-writing with this friend there, and pretty soon we got a Loretta Lynn cut. It was a single. And in fact, it was her last top 20 single for many years. And so, you know, it's kind of hard to explain the path because you meet a person and then they kind of connect you with another person and you just kind of work your way along. And I wound up then, this guy who was my friend that I was writing with at Combine, he had had quite a bit of success as a writer, but he was also a song plugger for the company. And then one day we finished 2 really good songs, and he died suddenly that night of a massive heart attack instantly. And a little time went by, and they decided to fill that slot at the company and specifically needed someone to plug the songs of Chris Christopherson and Tony Joe White, 2 of their top writers, and asked me if I would be interested in the job. And that's how I really got started on the business side and the publishing side.
Interesting. So, you know, this whole thing about mentors, I think, is a challenge for people early in their careers. I think, you know, it sounds like this mentorship relationship with this person just sort of evolved, and he got as much out of it probably as you did. Can you talk about how you sort of had that whole issue of mentorship and how you built it not only for yourself, but kind of give it back too?
Well, moving the story forward at that point, when I went to work at Combine, it was run by a fellow named Bob Beckham, who passed away just a few weeks ago. And Beckham he was a very interesting guy, and probably his greatest joy in life was helping songwriters. If you wanted to be close to Beckham, hey James, if you wanted to be close to Beckham, you went to him with a problem. And he really liked helping people. And he said, one of his sayings was, there's no problem a songwriter has that a hit record won't cure. Now you think about that. If you got marital problems, often it's based on finances. If you've got career problems, it's based on your self-perception and your success in the business and your feeling of how your peers are viewing you, and when you have a hit, they're loving you, you know. So he had several really wise sayings, and when I went to the funeral visitation a few weeks ago, I was telling his family that when I was working for Bob, I didn't know I was being mentored. But I was watching him and observing how he behaved, how he treated people, how he viewed the industry, how he did his job. And I learned so much, and I didn't even know it. And then years later, I find things coming out where I'm quoting him, or I'm thinking, gee, what would Beckham do in this particular situation to protect his writer, or that would be in the best interest of the writer he represents? So, so that's kind of how I guess I learned to mentor people, by being mentored and not really realizing it, because he certainly didn't know he was doing that, and I didn't either at the time.
Yeah, when people sometimes come to me and say, and ask me to be their mentor, and they're often surprised by my response. And my response is, well, we're just going to have to see. That's not just something you agreed to do, like, you know, signing a contract to do some work together or something like that. It really has to, I think, develop and evolve. And
it just happens.
And it happens, and it's got to be mutual. I mean, I think the mentor gets as much as the mentee in those relationships.
I agree. And I do think that among people, or the people that I know in the music business, or in any kind of business really, I think most people appreciate and acknowledge those who help them along the way, and they want to kind of pay it forward, you know, and help other people in return. Because I do think about that one guy in particular who was listening to my songs and saying things like, man, I've never seen anybody grow as quickly as a writer and mature as a writer at the pace that you are. And he probably didn't realize that it had so much to do with him encouraging me and making me feel good about myself and feel confidence. And it just somehow stimulated the creativity, even though, and I did have some hits as a writer, but as time went by, my full focus pretty much became publishing. But just encouraging people can do so much.
So, so the evolution into Green Hills was not like an abrupt decision, like I'm leaving the advertising agency. It sounds like that was something that evolved over time in terms of a career transition. Is that?
It did, but I was pretty stressed in my job. Now Green Hills came a lot later. There were a couple of other companies after the advertising agency, but I was driving to work one morning. I was stressed out about my job. My muscles in my neck and shoulders would kind of tense up on the way to work. And even though it was a good job and I liked it, but again, it wasn't what I came here to do. And there was a fellow named Earl Nightingale, who is a, what do you call those speakers, that motivational speaker?
Right.
Had a radio show, like a 3 to 4 minute little program that this radio station aired, and I would hear him on the way to work. And he said, live like the person you want to become, and you will become that person. And I thought, well, who do I want to become? I want to be a songwriter, and I want to be in the music business. So I think at that point is when I really sort of made up my mind that I'm going to make this happen. I don't know how long it's going to take. But then my radio friends, I would ask them for some connections of who might listen to some of my songs, who they might connect me with, their friends in the business. And, but that was kind of the moment that I just made that decision, I guess.
So you've moved in and out of songwriting into publishing a few times along the way, is that?
No, really, once I got into publishing, that was pretty much the career path. But at that point, what I would do is, I was wearing a three-piece suit and a tie and calling on clients as an advertising guy. And so at lunchtime, which would sometimes be kind of a really long lunchtime, I would take off the jacket, take off the vest, take off the tie, try to look like a songwriter, and drive up, get some appointments and drive up and have people listen to my music, people that I could get appointments with that would listen to the music. Then I'd put the advertising costume back on and go back to work. But over that time, I established some relationships, and yeah, it was kind of a slow transition, but there did come a point where I had to say, I've got to set a date, this is it. And I think that was 1979 in October, I believe, when I told the boss, actually, I think he came to me, he was getting into some areas that I just didn't have particular interest in, technology-wise, although by today's technology standard, 79 was quite archaic. But he was getting into something that eventually became faxing. It was sending messages over a telephone line. And he kind of got caught up in all that, and I just wasn't interested. And he came to me and said, I kind of need you to, I don't feel like this is the direction you're headed. Really need you to try to get on board. And I think at that point, I just said, I think it's time that I'm going to move off in a different direction.
So, fast forward a few decades, and talk about the decision to start up Green Hills, and kind of what was behind that, and what you had when you were opening, what you had hoped it was going to become.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about the structure of how we started it, I guess, more than the creative side. I had my partner, Carrie O'Neill, who now has a company called Big Yellow Dog Music. Carrie and I were partners in this company, Little Big Town Music. I'd been at Combine for about 8 years. Carrie came to me with this vision of starting this company. And let me talk a little bit about how that happened. From the business structure standpoint, since it's an entrepreneurship class, there had not really been a company that was funded by what one might describe as old Nashville investor money. And Carrie had a friend who was a consultant, I guess, with a group of investors, and had this idea that he could go and get these investors to invest in a music business. Now, at that particular time, there hadn't been the kind of boom that we've seen since then. So it was a real challenge, but he made presentations to these investors, did get the investors to commit to the point that we were able to start the company this would have been in 1987. We did have the support to open the company, signed a couple of top writers that I had worked with at Combine Music, then brought on a few other writers, but so then, fast forward from that about 2 years, we had our first #1 on our first anniversary, which is unheard of. The song was written, demoed, pitched, recorded, put on an album, came off the album as a single, moved up the charts and hit #1 a year after we started.
So you thought, this is easy, we're geniuses.
Absolutely, it was miraculous. And then right after that, we had another hit and then another hit. And so we decided, how do we get rid of these investors so this is our company? So then the challenge was how to lose the investors. It had been such a huge challenge to get the investors. And so we offered them a pretty good return as investors. They're just looking for a return on their money. We offered them a very good return to sell their stock back to the company. We went to the bank and borrowed the money based on our success and our activity, and we paid off the investors and moved forward as we were the owners of the company. It wasn't quite that simple, but that's the short version. So after 10 years there, we had had a lot of success, and excuse me if I'm stepping out of camera range for just a second. But we made this little promotional package. This is 3 CDs. And in this package, we called it Little Big Town, 10 years at the top, Little Big Town music. So we sent this out to all of our industry friends. We had a big party at 3rd and Lindsley and had the writers come up and sing their hits and had this, just a 10th anniversary party. And so there's like 2 discs that have hits on them, and there's 40 songs, 20 on each of the first 2 CDs. Then the last one is just called Cool Cuts, is what we call it. But it was things that, for a kind of small independent publishing company, were special. They weren't hit singles, but like a Neil Diamond cut, a Dusty Springfield cut, a Chet Atkins cut. So just interesting things that we did for the 3rd CD. And so pretty soon after we did this, Sony ATV kind of perked up and said, I think this really got their attention. They approached us about buying our company. And this was at the beginning of 1998. And we discussed it and decided that the big boom of the 90s, which would be a whole other seminar about how all that happened, but there had been such an unbelievable boom in the country music industry. And I always say we were so blessed to start when we did, and we were blessed to end when we did. And, so Sony wanted to purchase our catalog and hire me to run their creative department. Now, this has kind of become a collector's item, and I decided that it was going to be a door prize, and I was going to give it to the person that sat in the 3rd seat of the front row, and if not, then the 3rd seat of the 2nd row. So, I hope you enjoy that. I'm sorry you didn't sit in the front row. But anyway, so I was at Sony for 8 years, and the reason that I decided...
Talk about that transition, because it's,
okay,
for a lot of people who've had their own business, it's tough going to work for somebody else when they buy your company. I know people, I've not been in that industry, but industries I've been in, when we sold our business, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was go to work for somebody.
Mhm.
Was that a challenge to kind of get a paycheck and answer to a boss and
This
follow their dream instead of yours?
was 1998, and the president of the company was a lady named Donna Hilly. And I had never worked for a corporation before. Combine was an independent company. A Little Big Town was an independent company. So now I'm going to work for this multinational corporation, Sony. It was intimidating. I mean, I was just taking a leap of faith here because I didn't have any idea what it was going to be like. I was used to working with 6 to maybe at the most 12 writers at a time. Now I'm moving into a company that's got 150 writers on their roster. Many of them are artists, so it's not like there are 150 writers in the office every day. Many were full-time writers, but a lot of them were artists and some pretty big-name artists. I had never used a computer before. 1998.
98, you never touched a computer.
I had not. I was intimidated by it, as many of my generation, and I had an assistant who was very good at it, and it just worked. I mean, it was certainly time, and I made a decision. I've got to learn how to function with a computer. But that was the impetus for that, this new job. I knew that, and even the boss, who was older than me, she said, I don't use a computer. I don't know if you do or not. If you don't, that's okay. But I knew it wasn't okay. I mean, the world was changing. You guys can't imagine a world without a computer in your lap or in your pocket every day. But it was a huge transition. So I was going to work for a company where my predecessor in that role had never run his own company. He had always worked for Sony or for a corporation. A situation where he felt like probably the money was a bottomless well. And he had signed all his friends and just a lot of writers. It was the boom time of country music and was paying some what had now become ridiculous advances to songwriters. So one of my first jobs was to reduce the size of the roster and the expenditures. And
so you were the hatchet guy.
I was kind of the hatchet guy, and I thought of expenditures as my money because that was the only way I knew to think as an entrepreneur. I thought, you know, is this a wise use of the funds that I'm dealing with here? And so I did have to make some really hard decisions and had to let some writers go. It was a tough time, but I will say that in terms of working for the corporation, after coming out of the independent background, this employer, Donna Hilly, she tried to take as much of the corporate connection with New York as she could and treat the staff like it was still an independent company. This company had grown up as a very successful independent company called Tree International Publishing, and Sony ATV had acquired it, and in about 89, I think. And but she tried to keep it feeling local, and as long as she trusted me to do a good job, as long as I did a good job, she didn't put any pressure on me at all. I know now that she was probably under lots of pressure from New York because during my last couple of years there, she got very sick, and I was kind of thrust into her role. Even though I didn't have the title, I was kind of thrust into the leadership role. And then in the impetus for leaving and starting my company was, I always say that Sony graduated me in 2006. That means after 8 years, they didn't renew my contract. We had new leadership in New York, and yeah, I'd signed a lot of people who have now become pretty big stars, like Rascal Flatts and Taylor and Blake Shelton and you know, Josh Turner and Miranda and lots of artist writers that I signed during my time at the creative department there. But they had a big change in New York, and when they make changes, they feel like they got to bring in their people and change everything. So they let me go in 2006, and then so I'll talk a little bit about the structure of how I moved forward there. I was thinking, well, now what can I do?
Before you do that, did you feel liberated? Did you feel, how did you feel with that?
It hurts to be fired, but it was the right thing, and I think I knew it was the right thing. The leadership role in the company was to assume the new title of president was between me and another guy that I had brought in when we acquired the Acuff Rose Music Catalog, which was another big independent company. He was really working for me, but I knew that he was being considered for the leadership role. And honestly, I didn't try really hard to get the leadership role because I just didn't have the heart for it, I don't think. It just didn't feel like what I really wanted to do. So when the new president in New York called me up and said, Woody, I just want to let you know, I know that you know it was between you and Troy for the job.
So they did this over the phone?
Over the phone from New York. Yes, the president of New York.
You are in a tough industry, I'll tell you what.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, he said, we've decided that Troy's going to have the job. And I said, well, David, honestly, he would have been my second choice. And so, anyway, so we just kind of chuckled about it, and I made light of it because I knew in my heart it was the right thing. I don't belong. Troy Tomlinson is a wonderful president and CEO of Sony ATV Nashville. He does a great job. He's a good friend. I'm so happy for him to have that job and not me. But I did have to decide now what's going to make sense for me. I don't want to retire. A lot of people thought I would retire because we did pretty well when Sony purchased Little Big Town Music. We did real well with that. And it was a great paying job for 8 years, you know, but so I thought, well, now what do I do moving forward? I don't want to retire, I don't golf, I don't fish, I publish. It's what I do, it's what I love, and I still love. And so I came up with this idea. When I was at Sony, we had some joint venture companies, and what that meant was an entrepreneur would come to us and ask us to fund a company where partner with him or her, and I'm just going to use the generic him, okay, for simplicity. So we partner with that person. And he signed some writers with our approval and our agreement. We're paying the advances to the writers. We're paying some administrative advances for the operation of the joint venture company. And then all of the money that comes in from royalty earnings goes to Sony. And Sony then recoups the writer advances that have been paid out to the writers before the writers get money, and recoups the administrative advances to the joint venture publishing company before they get money. So that was a structure that had been done, but that had kind of fallen from grace. I knew the new president of Sony ATV had the attitude of, You know, if we've got such a great company and a great staff, what do we need those joint venture companies for? Why don't we just sign those writers? So I knew what the attitude was in the industry overall among the corporations with joint ventures. So I came up with this idea. What about if I try to do a non-exclusive joint venture, writer by writer, with the 4 corporate companies? There was Sony ATV, EMI, Warner Chappell, and Universal were the 4 major corporate publishers. So I went to the heads of each one, which I knew quite well, you know, all friends of mine, and I told them this idea, you know, I'm interested, would you sign a writer, just sign a writer with me, and pay me this much administrative advance annually, and pay the writer, you know, whatever we negotiate, but up to this much, set up a demo budget of this much, and all of them said, well, yeah, that sounds like a pretty interesting idea, you know, if we just have to agree on who the writer would be. Okay, so that's kind of in place, and I made a couple of pitches, and they passed, but then I met with a friend, not a fabulously wealthy guy, but a pretty well-to-do guy. He was a friend of mine from the past, and we'll go into that history, we don't have time, but he said to me, what are you doing? And we were over dinner, and I was explaining this structure, and he said to me, well, do you have to be in the music industry to partner with you on some writers? And I said, can we get back together Friday morning? Let me think about that. So we had a breakfast meeting on Friday morning, and I came to him with this plan where, yes, we can do this. The numbers were the same, but instead of those being paid as advances by a corporate publisher, he would pay me by each writer that we signed, this much administrative advance, this much in writer advances, and this much in demo budget. But the big difference is, he would be advancing me all the money to put into my bank account. If I'm making the contract for the writers and I'm going to be paying it out monthly in advances to the writers, I've got to have the money in my bank account. So instead of a corporation managing the funds and paying me, paying the writers, paying the demo bills, all of a sudden with this structure, the investor pays me writer by writer and delivers me the check at a certain point agreed upon by contract time each year, puts the money in my bank account, then I'm paying the demo bills, I'm paying the writer advances, and I'm sending the reimbursements to the investor. So I kind of got caught up in that structure, and this, interestingly, that guy wound up not being an investor at that time. But now I had a new business plan, so I went to this friend of mine who for years we were friends from college. And in fact, he's the guy who gave me the nickname Woody when we were in college. It's not my real name. Anyway, he had, over years, he had done very well and said he really wished he could do some kind of business with me. So I went to see if he was interested. He was very interested. He brought in another friend of his that he was very close to, who was kind of interested in investing in something with that friend. So I made the presentation, we talked it out. So they wound up signing the first writer I pitched to them, the second writer I pitched to them, and the third writer I pitched to them. And I didn't want to try starting out with 10 or 12 writers. I wanted this company to grow and be able to manage it and slowly expand and grow it. So I didn't go looking for other investors and other writers at that time. Then in September of 2008, I guess, it's when the economy crashed and they had to pull out. So most of these writers were signed to deals where, you know, it'd be a one-year deal, but we'd have the option to extend for a second year and then the option to extend for a third year. And so I was not able to exercise the options on these, this third year for these writers. So we had 3 really successful writers that we had 2 years of catalog on. Now, quickly moving forward, because I know time is a concern here, but the kind of deals I'm doing now are, I do business with writers who don't have to have an advance, who are in a position to furnish their own demos, But the trade-off for them is they're not getting an advance and they're paying for their own demos. So it has to be people who can afford to do that. But the good news is they bring their songs into our catalog, and what doesn't get cut goes right back to them at the end of the deal. So they're not signing up their songs for the life of the copyright. They're just signing up the songs for the life of the deal, and what doesn't get cut goes back to them.
So you're attracting more experienced
Yes,
writers. Yeah.
so it definitely attracts, and there are a lot of experienced writers out there who can't find deals with advances. Those are very rare, even for experienced writers. So that's kind of the structure I'm working with right now.
So what, and just a quick little bit, and then we'll open it for a couple of questions. What's your gut feel in terms of the health of the music industry over the next 5 or 10 years?
I've never been able to forecast very well. In all honesty, to people who are aspiring to get in the business, I have to be honest and say it's very challenging, probably more challenging than ever, but it's never been easy. So when people say, people do say to me, over the years people have said, hey, don't you think this is harder than it's ever been? And I'd say, well, it's never been easy. Now, when I've never known a time when people were going around going, hey, this is easy. But in hindsight, you view things a certain way. Now when people say, isn't this harder than ever? I say, you're damn right it is. But again, the ones who have the gut for it and are drawn to it and the gifts from God to do it, the talents, the skills, you'll make it. You'll find your way, and you'll find new business models. And the people who create new business models are not the executives in the business who have done business a certain way for decades. They can't think in new business models. They can only think in survival mode. And that's kind of where most of us are. We're surviving, for now during this downturn. When digital music came along, so many people started getting the music for free, and still a lot of people get it for free. But not just that, but even for the legally acquired music, it's singles, it's not albums. See, in the mid-90s, Garth Brooks put out an album that sold 10 million albums the first week. Now, if an album sells gold, which is 500,000, they throw a party. So that's the kind of world it is. And people back in the 60s and 70s, when people were buying 45 RPM records, that was called a singles business because they bought it, song by song. Well, we're in the digital singles business now. If you have the hit single, business is great because you can get 1 million downloads at the full mechanical rate. Because downloads do pay the full mechanical rate. It's not a negotiated lower rate like some things are. But so if you have a hit single, business is great. I can name you 5 or 6 writers in town right now who would say, wow, business is better than it's ever been. But if you're not getting the singles, it's a struggle. It's a real struggle. I'm getting some great cuts by great artists, but my company is now 6 or 7 years old. We have not had a big single. We've had a few singles, but not a really big, high-paid single. So it's a struggle.
Got a couple minutes for questions.
Yes.
What advice would you give to someone who, you're really passionate about the industry, like the business side and songwriting? Do you think that muddies the waters too much and it would kind of kick me in the foot, or
Can the questions be heard on the cameras? I guess they can. Okay. What advice do I give to someone who is interested in writing and in the music business? That's such a hard question. No two paths are the same. Nobody has exactly the path I had. Nobody has the path Luke Laird had, or Casey Musgraves, or, they're all different. Work hard, meet people, be social. With social media now, of course, it's a totally different ballgame than what I grew up in. But still, you need to meet people, get to know people. In terms of writing, pursuing a career as a writer, you always want to do what we call writing up. You want to write with someone who's further along than you are. The only problem is that person wants to write with someone who's further along than they are. So that's real tricky. But if you go to writers' nights, or if you play writers' nights, there'll be writers there who are further along, who are captivated with what you do. And go up and say, hey, I really like your music, maybe we should get together sometime. And getting into a publishing company is often done through becoming a co-writer with a published writer. It certainly happened with me. I've discovered some great writers who have delivered some great hit songs because they were young writers and they wound up somehow getting to co-write with some of my staff writers. I became aware of their music, then I listened to some of their other music and signed them.
As someone, an outsider, who's watched a lot of people come through our program and your program jointly, I think it actually is a benefit to have a couple different talents, because you're not quite sure which one's going to stick and which one's going to work. Again, one of the very first audio engineering students when the program started was an entrepreneurship minor, and he thought he was either going to be an audio engineer or performer. He's a songwriter, he's doing real well at it. And so I think the more, given the state of the industry, the more options you have, you'll be able to seize the right opportunity when it comes to you. So.
And internships are a great way to connect with the industry. You know, if you're interested in publishing and you get a publishing internship, there's a possibility that they might have a position opening up, you know, at the time that you're leaving school.
We have the winner of the CD had his hand up for a question.
I did, yeah. Sorry, I was
Yes.
distracted by the titles. But, how many songs does a writer need to have? Like a good writer. Is it like 3? Is there a certain number that you look for when you're signing someone? Like obviously, if someone just has one really good song and the rest is garbage, would you still sign them? Or
You make it awfully attractive when I sign garbage. Probably not. But, you know, when you're pitching songs to someone, I think if you're taking in a CD, and I don't even know how much longer that's going to be, the medium, you know, maybe it's a thumb drive, or maybe it's just them streaming your music, going on Reverb Nation and streaming your music or something. But anyway, if you're pitching songs to someone, pursuing a deal, meeting with a publisher, then I would say 3 songs is a good number. Have with you not a briefcase necessarily, but a notebook or something that has another CD in it with more songs in case they say, I love these, what else you got? You know, you want to be prepared for that. But I think presenting 3 songs in a publisher meeting is a good number. In terms of, you know, publishers are not really looking for songs, they're looking for songwriters. They are looking for someone, and I know that was the point you were making, that I kind of joked about, but they are looking for people that they see something special in their writing. We have, unfortunately, a real tendency to sign people who are individual, they're a little different from everything else that's going on. We see something special in that person, then we sign them and then start networking them with all the successful writers until then their writing kind of blends in with everybody else. So be on guard about that. Try to keep your writing special and individual when someone shows an interest in you because of that. But yeah, 3 songs is a good number to take into a meeting, and then you'll know if they'll let you know if they want to hear more.
Well, we are out of time, and that really went by quickly. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Good to meet you.